I think China is playing a balancing act right now. It's also playing the long game. It is being careful to maintain its rhetorical support for Iran, which has a strategic partnership with Beijing, a formal pact signed in 2021. But it is not going so far as to provide Iran material support in this war, at least as far as we can tell, in part because China is worried about balancing its ties to other Gulf states who it also sees as important partners in the region. So I think what we're likely to see from Beijing is this continued calibrated approach of backing Iran, but only so far.
What is the distinction of that versus Mr. Putin, Moscow, and Russia?
Moscow is going in a little bit further tilts with Iran, where we're seeing reports that Russia is, for example, targeting intelligence and other intelligence sharing with Iran to support its actual military activity against the U.S. and Israel. That is certainly further than where China has been willing to go to date. But I think even for Russia, we're unlikely to see Russia get directly involved in this fray. It remains very much focused on the war in Ukraine, and it is also a little bit leery of doing anything that would draw Washington's ire and maybe push the United States to either support Ukraine more deeply or to heighten sanctions on Russia.
Jennifer, the market's very uncertain as to the status of what's going on in Iran, particularly as it relates to negotiations. Yesterday, President Trump issued via social media that talks were in fact taking place, and he was so enthused that he was going to pause some military options. Yet we've not really heard anything confirming that from the other side. Do you have any insight as to what's actually going on?
Yeah, we're actually hearing directly contradictory things from Iran, which is flat out denying that talks are happening, including denying this Axios report regarding specific talks that were happening between Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Iran's parliament speaker, with the Iranian parliament speaker coming out on X and saying he is not involved in those negotiations. I think, to be clear, we should recognize that both sides have an interest in putting out different language on this, that the U.S. wants to reassure markets, and Iranian officials probably don't want to admit to negotiating with the United States while still under attack. That being said, the United States does seem to be pursuing negotiations. Talks might be happening through back channels or indirectly through mediators. There does seem to be some sort of communication occurring, but I think the larger question is, does that mean we're any closer to a ceasefire? And at this stage, we would say no. Both sides seem to be very far apart on what the terms of that would be. And so we see the odds of a full resolution of this conflict in the near term as rather unlikely. Instead, what we might see is either further escalation as the United States is considering deploying additional forces to the region, or a dip into a lower intensity conflict that could still pose major risks to the global energy market.
Jennifer, from your sources, is there a sense that there's a possibility or probability or a likelihood that President Trump may just wake up someday and say, I'm kind of bored of all this, and say we've achieved our objectives and just kind of walk away? Is that in the cards at all?
It does seem, and it has seemed for at least 2 weeks now, that President Trump is looking for an exit ramp. He's referred to the war as having already achieved many of his objectives, as being very complete, and he predicted an end to it would come very soon. I think that being said, the fact that we're still continuing to see U.S. strikes on Iran suggests it hasn't achieved, or he doesn't feel he has the leverage or the terms that he's looking for to end this war. And I think in particular what he's concerned about is reopening Hormuz before he can fully back away.
Jennifer, one final question. It's outside your remit, but you're more than qualified to handle this. I'm looking at yields higher in many different flavors, including the inflation-adjusted yield, the cost of capital, if you will. Does Jennifer Welch believe in markets telling politics what to do? Do you believe in Ed Yardeni's bond vigilantes?
Well, I would say this. I think President Trump is uniquely quite sensitive to markets, and that's part of what we've seen in terms of his rhetoric shifting over the last week or two. In particular, his message yesterday morning when markets were about to open, that he was seeking talks with Iran, kind of backing away from his prior threat to strike Iranian energy facilities. That seemed very much directed at shaping markets as they were opening in the United States.